So just for some transparency, a lot of what we will be looking at today is what was in WWE and not necessarily what still is. Don't really know what that means, but we shall get a nice feel for the backstage environment, and sometimes I tell ya, it's totally crazy. Isn't that just wrestling though? I certainly think so, and my name is also Simon from What Culture. Please do subscribe. This is 10 WWE creative secrets the writers don't want you to know about. Number 10, their worst creative shortcut. A lot of people do talk about this, but I'm not sure we've made the tie-in that it's intentional. It's not just a wrestler going off, they've been told to do it. But if you ever do see a performer, often The Miz, start to run off their achievements like they're reading their own Wikipedia page, yep, this is part of the plan. We are essentially filling time to make sure there's something on television, which is why it happens on Raw a lot. We've got 3 hours, pal. JD McDonough even did this after he debuted on the main roster on the 15th of May 2023, when he just told us all the things that Dolph Ziggler had won in his career, which apparently is why he had to beat him. I don't know. If that's the remit, why aren't you going after Roman Reigns? Apollo Crews also did this on the same show when during his comeback chat he talked about being a former US and Intercontinental Champion. I'm not sure it helps anyway, but it definitely doesn't if everybody is doing it. Number 9, those times they don't actually tell stories. So that is a little bit of a sweeping statement, but it's to tie it into a more generic point. Let us look at Damage Control. The idea was Bayley was so disillusioned she wanted to take back control, hence the name, even more so because she felt disrespected. Nobody was talking about her contributions. The problem was, while she brought this into feuds with Becky Lynch and Bianca Belair, it was just in the background and not ever used to push things forward. We saw this again too with Seth Rollins versus Logan Paul. Now, I loved all of this, but the story was Rollins had beef with Paul because he was an outsider, sneaking in and trying to take a piece of the pie. Rollins would therefore defeat him to prove that he didn't belong, and then Logan jumped him twice, and we had the match. Seth won, that was that, and it was fun, but this original concept didn't evolve. I suppose the best way to look at it would be what was the payoff. It's not like WWE doesn't do it. See Rey Mysterio and Dom Dom. That was the total opposite. The Bloodline would get in the good category too, but it is a crutch WWE relies on here and there, even when they don't need to. Just make sure these narratives get the same TLC as the others we've mentioned, and boom, problem solved. Number 8, sometimes they don't know what they're doing. A few years ago, a corporate WWE video leaked that we were not meant to see. It's the most Vince McMahon thing ever, as the first thing we hear is a writer telling us that the mission of the creative writing team is to put smiles on people's faces. And when a host of these individuals start talking about their backgrounds, not one mentions wrestling. Amazing. It's all TV, soap operas, and sports, and while having an outside voice is essential for a different perspective, you need some people with knowledge. I don't want a doctor who used to be a mechanic doing my surgery. I want a damn surgeon. You also learn that it's somebody's job to check for grammar errors, so that's something. Whole thing is a little bit strange. Number 7, sometimes they think the product is bad too. Because all you need to do is go listen to John Moxley's appearance on the Talk is Jericho podcast in 2019, where that man goes off. He talks about how difficult and bad the WWE creative process is because he couldn't make heads or tails out of it. There were too many cooks, too much back and forth, and too much confusion. During this, Mox also let slip the writers think this too, because when one was explaining the terrible character John had to play in 2018, even they were like, yeah, sorry, it's not great. They even tried to justify it by saying the whole thing was done to appease Vince McMahon. Because of all of this, these two then tried to change it up enough so McMahon would be happy with it, and that it wouldn't be as awful as the concept currently pitched for. It's ridiculous. Former writer Dave Schilling even tweeted an apology saying he had written at least one terrible promo for Alexa Bliss in the run-up to WrestleMania 35, and it was the same for Tom Kaseya. He told the Agenda podcast in 2017 intricate stories were kind of null and void, as Vince wasn't interested, so let's always remember this. When you're writing for an audience of one, can be quite difficult. Number 6, they do try to appease Vince McMahon. Given what we've just talked about, we may as well make it a proper entry too. Underline the whole thing. This may be more of a then than a now thing as the creative process has changed with Triple H having more power, but still, for years the idea was to write something that the chairman of the board would like, so you remained in his good books. I get that, you don't want to lose your job. Dan Madigan, who used to be part of this process, spoke about it in the Ring of Hell book, where he kind of compared it to a cult. You have somebody at the top, and that's where your attentions lie. Ex-employee Kevin Marshall reiterated this, saying you basically sit there and try and figure out what McMahon wants, So it's like a Professor Layton puzzle. For those now saying Kevin was out the door over a decade ago, it was the same for the aforementioned Schilling, who was at WWE as recently as 2019. He told Fightful the same thing. It's all about what Vince likes. So there you go. Number 5, it goes even further than that too. Because when you are in these creative meetings, sometimes your job is just to sit there and listen to Vince McMahon go off. Or so it is said. We go back to the former writers who have spoken about this, as Dr. Ranjan Chiba revealed that often McMahon would just start yelling about a certain wrestler for ages, and everybody had to sit there and nod. There was no rhyme or reason to this either. There would just be some silence and then bam! Vince would pick a target and explain why said individual sucks and should never be thought of again, until he changed his mind. This never tied in either, or so it is claimed. It could come totally out of left field, and I tell ya, I need to be in one of these meetings. Must be totally surreal. Number 4, the toxic culture. Thankfully, there are a lot of report these days that the backstage WWE environment is getting better. We're never going to know for sure either way because we're not there, but I do hope people are happy. Nothing more important than that. Many a wrestler have come out following their exit, though, with words of sadness, much like Cody Rhodes did in 2016. As we know, he was totally disillusioned that he wasn't able to dump the Stardust gimmick, and even took a shot at some of the writers, saying that the 2 leads of Raw and SmackDown failed to write him into worthwhile storylines. He even alleged that one was too busy pretending to be Brian Gewirtz, while the other was too busy hitting on developmental divas to do their job. I mean, yeah. Far more worrying were the many reports from former employees of Vince writing himself into stories featuring the then WWE divas, and we've all heard about the bullying and hazing that has happened behind the scenes. It doesn't sound fun at all. It obviously all came to head with the McMahon allegations, which saw him step aside for a few months before a bonkers return, and none of this is good. Doesn't matter what the job is, protecting those in the middle of it all has to be a priority. No questions asked. Number 3, the star wrestlers go out their way to undermine the writers. Because you would, wouldn't you? If you're in a position of power and somebody is asking you to do something you don't want to do, you will likely use all of your pull to try and sort it out. It's not exclusive to wrestling. That's life. We should also point out this isn't always the way, as somebody like Daniel Bryan was very vocal about how much he loved working with the writing team. But let us move on to Matthew Randazzo V, who had this story in Power Slam magazine from an unnamed source. During what is now dubbed as Triple H's Reign of Terror, a scribe handed the game a piece of paper with his plans on it for the evening, to which Hunter replied, "Am I going flubbing over?" And he didn't say flubbing. When he was told no, Triple H took the page and threw it on the floor before telling this guy to leave. Whether this is true or not, we don't know, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. The man with 3 H's wielded mad power. Former writer Freddie Prinze Jr. went further than this on his very good podcast when he spoke about The Undertaker doing similar things. When wife Michelle McCool was pitched to lose her Divas title to Karma, the dead man used his influence to magically get this switch. You can't just point the finger at these two, though. If I listed all of the examples, we'd be here all day. Basically, anybody who has ever got to the top of the tree has done this in some sense. Just seems to be the way. Number 2, and the writers get it publicly as well. And don't pretend they don't. One thing goes bad and boom, Twitter is all over these guys. There's nothing wrong with being upset with an angle either. You are watching to be entertained. But sometimes maybe it's best to remember they're likely struggling too. Look at the obstacles they face every day. The wrestlers also get in on this, as CM Punk spoke openly on his Best in the World DVD about tearing a script up in front of a writer, as he felt he could tell a better straight-edge story than whatever this said. Paul White on Talk is Jericho said the writing wanted him to bash his head in with a hammer. Sheesh. Drew McIntyre also dropped a sarcastic tweet in 2021 when he was teaming with Big E to face the Dirty Dogs for the second week in a row. And even Roman Reigns said it all sucked during the pandemic. So there you have it. We've already spoken about the tirade Jon Moxley went on after he left in WWE, but that ties into, number 1, the race to avoid Vince McMahon. Yep. Think of that. I'm sure it has happened more than this, but Mox told the story of getting a script where he would have to say the words "pooper scooper." As a brand new heel, he knew this was death, so agreed with the writer in charge to make sure Vince never saw this version, as they knew McMahon would love it. So the race was on. Describing it as self-preservation mode, John's main concern during these times was not to look like an idiot. Good grief. It does sound like things have changed with Triple H in his new position, but still, you gotta figure not all of these habits have gone away, And this one definitely should. Know of any other creative secrets the writers don't want you to know about? Make sure you let us know in the comments below. You can also like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Head over to whatculture.com if you'd like to read more of these articles with your eyes. And we're on social media, because of course we are. It's What Culture WWE and Simon Miller 316. And look, there's another list on the screen. I think you should give it a click. My name is Simon Miller from What Culture. Thank you very much for joining me as always. And if you would like to go have a piece of cake right now, I think you should. That's right, you have permission. I'll talk to you soon.